Hello everyone. We are getting into, it's the second to last section we're going to do here in chapter 9. We're on page 288 here in the student journal. If you want to follow along, grab some notes. Chapter 9 is similar to chapter 8. It's very short. We're going to do 9.3. Today it's on Monday. We're going to quiz on that, and then really we're just going to add 9.5 before we take that chapter 9 test. All right, so Chapter 9 is really all about different ways that we can solve these different quadratic equations. 9.2, we learned how to solve by graphing if we had either an image of a graph or we could look one up through Desmos or graphing calculator. With 9.3, we're going to solve using square roots. This is more, 9.2 is solving graphically, 9.3 is more solving kind of algebraically. All right, so square root, we've talked a little bit about square roots. We did that with 9.1 where we're simplifying these square roots. It's when we go from, square root of 64 is equal to 8, right? And zero function, just a reminder, we're looking for these solutions here to these equations. It would be the x-intercept if we were to graph it, but this time we're not graphing. We're going to go through and actually do the math here. All right. So before we really hop into it, we really need to understand, again, there's a number of different possibilities here as far as number of answers, number of solutions. So it depends on this value right here. It depends on if it's positive, if it's 0 or negative. So when you have a positive number, let's say I had x squared is equal to 49. We want to use our inverse operation. So just like if I had x minus 2, I would think I need to add 2 to both sides. I need to do the opposite operation. I'm going to do the opposite of squaring x, which is to take the square root. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Something to keep in mind, you've got to take the positive and negative square root. If you haven't seen this before, this plus minus, it just means the positive and negative version of that value. Okay, so I'm not just finding the square root of 49, which is 7. I'm finding the positive and negative value. So I'm going to say, okay, this is x, and my answer is positive and negative 7. It's the easiest thing to forget. It's so easy to just say, oh, the answer is 7, but think about it for a second. I know that 7 squared is going to get me 49, so if I plug in a 7, okay, 7 squared is equal to 49. That's true. 49 is equal to 49. That's very messy. But I also know that if I were to take 7 squared, that's also just equal to 49. That's why we need, if this number, this value right here is positive, I always need 2 answers. I need a positive and a negative answer. You're always finding the positive and negative square root. Okay? If you're solving by square roots, which we're doing, okay, when we're solving by square roots, we need our positive and negative square root. Okay, that's very messy. I'm going to rewrite that. Okay. We also have this opportunity. We have a possibility. We have 2 answers. We can also have 1 answer. That's going to happen in one very specific instance. When we have, let's say, x squared is equal to 0. Right? So it's not a positive number. It's just 0. We solve it the same way. We say, okay, what's the square root of this? And then the positive and negative square root of 0. That cancels each other out, so I just get x. Technically, my answer is positive or negative 0, but when we simplify that out, it's just x equals 0. We don't have a positive and negative version of 0. It's just x is equal to 0. Okay, so I might have two solutions right here. It's positive 7 and negative 7. I can have one solution, or I can have no real solutions at all. When I have x squared is equal to a negative number, think about for a second how square roots work. I can try and find the square root of each of these values, but try and think of two numbers that when you multiply them together, you get a negative value. It's not negative 7, because negative 7 times negative 7 is still positive 49. And I can't do like positive 7 and negative 7 because those aren't the same value. We don't have a number where I can multiply it by itself and end up with a negative, I can't multiply it by itself and end up with a negative number. It just doesn't work. So we have no solution, okay, or no real solutions. All right, we don't get too far into this, but just so you've seen it, mathematicians started to get very annoyed by this problem a couple hundred years ago, so they said, let's just invent a number. Okay, I'm getting tired of not being able to solve these problems where I need the square root of a negative number. So that's when we invented imaginary numbers. Okay, and everyone always gets super annoyed when they hear the word imaginary numbers. They're going, that sounds really tough. But it's basically just a way to solve these problems. We said, you know what? Let's make up a number where it's the square root of negative 1. It's called an imaginary number. It's just I. All right, and I won't get way too far into that because we don't really have any problems that do that. You'll just say no solution, but eventually when you're in Algebra 2, you're going to see this imaginary number, okay? But we just deal with real solutions, so we say no solution because it's not a real solution. All right, let's go into some examples. I'm going to do quite a few just because it's been a while since we've had to work something out like this. Let's start with, this is similar to those examples I was showing you, number 1. But notice that setup is slightly different. In order to solve these, the main thing we need to do is make sure you have whatever's being squared, usually it's x, so x squared equal to something, right? X squared equal to some value. You don't want anything other than what is being squared on one side of your equation. So we're going to have to do a little bit of algebra to get just x squared equal to some value. So I'm going to subtract 49 here from each side. X squared is equal to negative 49. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to square root each of these. I'm going to have that positive and negative, but this kind of should set up alarm bells. When I'm square rooting that negative number, I need to remember this doesn't work without using imaginary numbers, okay? This is no solution here. Okay, so you don't need to really solve it out any more than that. No solution when you try to square root that negative number. Okay, so let's see one that does work out. I've got x squared minus 25. I'm going to add 25 to each side. So I get x squared equal to 25. It's in this format that I want, x squared equal to a value. So then I can go ahead and square root. Always want that plus or minus in front when I'm doing that step. So I get x is equal to positive or negative 5. You could also write this x equals 5, x equals negative 5. It doesn't really matter. This is fine. And writing them out separately is also fine. It means the same thing. The plus or minus just makes it a little shorter. Let's see. We have another one over here. Again, I don't want other stuff over with that x squared. I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to subtract 6. I get x squared is equal to 0. So I'm going to square root each side there. I just get x is equal to, technically it's plus or minus 0, but really when I simplify, it's just x equals 0. I can't really have positive or negative 0. Okay, so No solution, 2 answers, 1 answer. That's kind of the range of answers I can get. Let's get into a little bit more complicated algebra here. I'm going to do a couple more examples. Right, I've got 2x squared minus 72. So not only am I going to have to move that 72 over on this one, I'm going to add 72 to each side here. But I don't want a square root at this point yet. When I have the 2x squared, I want it just to be x squared. I don't want that 2 there. I'm also going to divide out the 2 before I square root this one. Okay, x squared is equal to, that's 36. Now that I just have, that's why I kind of wrote this up here. Now that I just have that x squared equal to value, now I can go ahead, I can square root all of this. Okay, square root. I know this has to be the positive or negative square root, so x is equal to positive or negative 6. All right, I'm going to do 4 more. Oh, don't want to do that. All right, I've got number 7. Again, just a little bit more. I'm going to add this 49 here to each side. I get 8x squared equal to 200. I want to divide out that 8. I'm going to divide out my little coefficient here. X squared is equal to 25. Now is where I want to go ahead and square root. So I'm going to square root each side here. And I get x is equal to positive or negative 5. Alrighty. Over here, number 12. Let's see. Again, I want to move this value, and then I can go ahead and divide. So I'm going to subtract out 16 from each side. Negative 2x squared equal to 0. I don't want that coefficient there in front of my x squared, so I'm going to divide that out. And I get x squared equal to 0 divided by negative 2 is just 0. I'm going to square root each one here. I just get x is equal to 0. Right. So now I can go ahead. Here are a couple kind of tougher examples. The key with these, notice how these look different from these up above, the ones on the bottom level. Instead of keeping your x squared terms separate from that value, this is saying this whole thing, this whole x plus 2 is being squared. So we're not going to move the 2 over. We're not going to deal with anything inside those parentheses first. Now we actually are going to go ahead and square root first, because think back again to this basic setup here. You want x squared equal to value. Well, now our x is just a little bit more complicated. Now our x there is really x plus 2. That whole thing is being squared. So we want to go ahead and undo that process first. So this time we are going to square root before we do anything else. Square root. Remember, that's a positive or negative square root there. That just cancels out your square. That's just going to be x plus 2. And I get positive or negative 14. So what I like to do is kind of break this into 2 equations. I like to say, okay, this is x plus 2 equals 14. X plus 2 equals negative 14. So people might like to do it slightly differently. Some people just keep the plus and minus till the very end. I think it's easier to understand is, okay, I've got 2 equations. One's equal to positive 14. One is equal to negative 14. Okay, so I just have one little step. I want to get rid of this 2. So I get my final answers. I get x is equal to 12. And x is equal, I'm going to subtract. So I've got x is equal to negative 16. Right, so be careful on these ones where you're taking that entire, x plus 2, x minus 4, you're taking that entire little binomial and squaring the whole thing. You're not just going to have, positive and negative 12 like we've had before. You have plus or minus 5. We have two totally different numbers on these. So just be careful. Make sure you're following the steps correctly and you're going in the right order with all of these. I'm going to do just one more because these are a little tricky, and then we'll be totally done for 9.3. We've got this 2x plus 7 all squared equal to 49. This is another one of those that we're just going to square root the whole thing all at once. Right? I want to get rid of that square, so I'm just going to square root each side here. So I've got this square root that's going to cancel out. I just get 2x plus 7. That's equal to plus or minus 7. Okay, so I'm going to change this into two different equations here. I've got 2x plus 7 equal to 7 and 2x plus 7 equal to negative 7. Okay, so here I'm going to subtract and I just get 0. 2x equal to 0. And I get x equals 0 for my first answer. Over here, when I subtract, now I'm going to get negative 14. And when I divide that out, I get x equals negative 7. Right? X equals 0 and x equals negative 7. Right? You have some problems in the textbook from this. The very last thing we're going to do in Chapter 9 is just the quadratic equation. And then we are basically going to be done with Chapter 9. We're going to take that test right before Memorial Day. And that's going to be one of the last big grades going in. So make sure we're finishing strong. We, again, have pretty much these last 2 weeks to really bring your grades up if you're concerned about that at this point. All right, I'll see you guys soon.